I don't have the money, so I can't invest. The biggest lie you could tell yourself. Find the investment first, because then it becomes real, then it becomes tangible, then it's like, oh my gosh, I really want this. And then you put your mind to work on how you're going to get it. And that's where the fun happens.
You said, my family thought I was crazy for focusing on assets rather than a job. And then you say I was crazy successful.
I never use the word try. If somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to try to make the meeting tomorrow, I'm like, you're not going to be there. You either do it or you don't do it. I hate the word try. I hate that word.
Sometimes people just pigeonhole themselves like, I can only do this or only do that. But if you're good at something, it can scale like that. It's usually your mind that's stopping you.
Every time I part with money, Brian, I learn something. Every time. It could be $10. I'm going to learn because I hate to lose money.
There's a great quote from you where you said, entrepreneurship regrows your brain from the damage that school has done.
The biggest crimes of the school system is that kids come out of school thinking they're dumb and they're not. Or the other side of it, kids come out of school thinking they're smart and they're not. You're actually programmed not to make mistakes. The only way a person learns is by making a mistake. The way school teaches is opposite of what it takes to be successful in the real world.
Wealth means you being able to live your life to the fullest, about how you can get the most out of life, give the most back, be the most.
Nothing happens unless something moves. You got to move, you got to stay in motion. It's getting out there and doing it, allowing the failures to happen and learning from the failures. I think that's the key to life.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Kim Kiyosaki, the author, entrepreneur, and real estate investor. You are the co-founder and CEO of the Rich Dad Company, and alongside your husband, Robert, have dedicated the last 30 years of your life to providing financial education to millions of people around the world. Your investing career began in 1989 with a small rental house in Oregon, and today you own thousands of properties, including hotels, golf courses, and commercial units. You wrote the best-selling book, Rich Woman, with the goal of helping women everywhere create true independence by taking control of their financial future. You ultimately believe there remains a huge void when it comes to financial education, and your goal is to help as many people as possible understand how to take action and create long-lasting wealth. Kim, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian. I love being on your show. I love talking with you. It's always an adventure.
Kim, it's great to have you back. I think last time you were here was about 4 years ago, but we've hung out in many places. I know you've had, dinner with the whole crew in Phoenix and in London, and it's always a great time hanging out with you and obviously Robert and like kind of the whole crew. So great to have you on. And, your stuff always cuts through, Kim. And, you have a different frequency, but your message, sometimes you need different frequencies to get a message to the right people. And so I'm so glad you're here. And again, you've lived your philosophy for the last 30 years. As a quick aside, I've been tagging you and Robert lately on my Instagram because I have Cash Flow for Kids right here in my studio.
Oh, thanks.
It's on our conference room table. And my two sons, they're 6 and 7 years old. We play every Sunday Cash Flow for Kids. And so
thank you for doing that. I love that.
They keep saying, when do we win? When do we win? And for me, when Damon's 5, he's almost 6, and he's got this sheet in front of him that says, his income statement, and they're talking about passive income. And so for me, every time they roll the dice, I'm winning as a parent.
Yes.
Because these young boys are getting in their heads, thanks to you and Robert and building this amazing game, that it's all about acquiring assets that cash flow as opposed to being in this rat race where we're waiting for a salary. And so, I played Monopoly when I was a kid, but this is like Monopoly on steroids because they're getting these subliminal messages. So I'm going to keep tagging you on that. But if anybody's curious.
I love that you're teaching your kids that. I would, more and more parents are starting to realize how important that is. And just changing the mindset, because that's really what the cash flow game does and the cash flow for kids. It just changes your mindset because people are taught to work hard for money, and we work really, really hard for money, but we're never taught what to do with our money. So thank you for kind of changing that mindset of your kids. And I know I know being your kids, they're going to be phenomenal as adults. So
I hope so. I hope so, because I started them off like paying them an allowance to do chores. And then I realized I'm actually incentivizing them the wrong way, right? That's like, that's a paycheck. And so, yeah, now I'm trying to get him back on track. But like, maybe we start there, Kim, because you've always said couples should play the cash flow game.
Yes.
You and Robert, people don't know, you and Robert created the cash flow game before the Rich Dad book. And ultimately, I think it was your way of trying to re-educate everybody from a financial perspective. But like, what was the philosophy of that game? Because it's a lot of what you're about.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that the game came first. So we created the cash flow game. The book came as a result of Robert working on a brochure to promote the game. That's how that came about. But the cash flow game came about because Robert and I, in 1994, we were financially free. And everybody thought, well, you must have had millions of dollars, or you sold your business for a lot of money, or big stock portfolios. And it's like, no, we didn't have any of that. Just as you're saying, Brian, it was our assets. And an asset in the Rich Dad world is something that puts money in your pocket, whether you work or not. So what we had $10,000 a month, every month coming in from our investments, primarily real estate. But our living expenses at the time were only $3,000. So at that point, we were financially free. And instead of traveling the world, everybody's like, how did you do it? How did you do it? We actually took step by step. And this was interesting, how to put what we did into a game that was fun and entertaining. And we kind of trick people into learning because they're having fun. So what we did is we actually took the steps that we took to become financially free, and we put it in the game. So the financial statement, which is the scorecard in the game, actually is a type of financial statement that we look at every month. And you've got in the game, you've got the income statement, you've got the balance sheet, and you've got the statement of cash flow. So we wanted people to teach people. So instead of us traveling all over the world, the game travels all over the world to places that Robert and I would never, ever get to. And then people can teach one another. People can teach their kids. We have it in businesses. I had somebody who played the game with 3 accountant applicants for their business to see what the behavior was, because it really is a mindset change. And it's you watch people's behavior and it really comes to the surface. So it's my passion. I like to be the queen of cash flow. And I love that this game, we're now going to have a digital version that we're about to launch, which is very, very exciting. But the more people out there get access to this game, I think financial literacy is the number one thing that if people could understand financial literacy, I think it's at the root of so many of people's problems, that the lack of financial literacy. So the more financially literate, the less dependent we become on government, the less dependent we become on bosses, the more control we have over our lives. And I'm all about taking control of the financial life.
Yeah, well, let's go a bit deeper on that. There's a great quote from you where you said entrepreneurship regrows your brain from the damage that school has done. Why aren't we financially literate? It's a question I always ask. And, a couple of years ago, we went heavy into the blockchain space. Mm-hmm. And when you play around with Bitcoin for a while, you start looking at the fiat currency system, askance a little bit. And then you start asking these questions like, well, how come we weren't taught about money? And then obviously, things that Robert has said so many times, schools teach you to be poor, things that you echo. But why weren't we taught financial education? Why are we still not taught financial education?
That's a great question, Brian. We have hit our head against the wall trying to bring the games and books into the school system. All we get is we don't teach money in school. It's like it's an evil subject, which I do not understand, because it's something everybody uses every day in their life. It's like the number one life skill. Yet people don't know. We work so hard for our money, but then nobody teaches us what to do with our money. So maybe it's on purpose. Maybe they don't want us to know about money. I don't know. When we created the cash flow game, Brian, one of the first things I did is I sent it. I had a contact at Harvard, and she was a professor there. So I sent it to her and I said, play this game, see what you think, and I'll call you in a couple of weeks. So I call her in a couple of weeks and I said, have you played the game? She goes, this is Harvard, Kim. We don't play games at Harvard, and we don't teach about money. It's below them. It was like below them. So I really don't know today. More and more schools are starting to bring, but not really the public school system. I see it in charter schools. I see it in homeschooling. I see it in individuals, teachers, parents who will bring financial education into the school. But I think it could just be on purpose that the powers that be do not want people financially literate, because then they would have more control over their life. And maybe there's forces that don't want that to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, let's go a little bit deeper on that, because there's people that also start to criticize when the government starts sending people checks. And,
yes,
you did a great interview with PragerU, and they were dropping clips of you recently where I think you were saying, we got to stop conditioning people to expect or get used to getting that check, that unemployment check, that COVID check, that whatever check, because it conditions them, I guess, to be ultimately helpless.
Yes.
Some people say that all these social programs, they look like you're helping people, but other groups zoom out and they say, actually, you're doing the opposite to these people. You're conditioning them to be dependent on the state. Then their behaviors have to kind of align with the state.
Correct.
And sooner or later, you're actually incentivizing families not to stay together. You're incentivizing people not to work. And you've almost created these anti-humans just to get that check. I don't know. I'm curious for your thoughts on all that.
Oh, I've got big thoughts on that. I think one of the worst things you can do is give people money. One of the most important things is what it does to your soul, to your spirit, to your self-esteem. What makes countries great is production. What makes people great is getting out there and producing, coming up against obstacles and having breakthroughs, and all of this. I think it's just keeping people very, very dependent on the government. And of course, if you give people money, there is a price to pay. And that price is your freedom. That price is control over your own life, control over your own body even. And now they're coming out with UBI, Universal Basic Income. They're experimenting with that in the US, where everybody gets a check. I mean, I think it's the worst thing you can do. I am a huge proponent of capitalism, free markets, free trade. I think that's what keeps the world running, not just giving people money, printing more money, giving people checks, stimmy checks. Oh, my goodness. So many people right now in the U.S. are not working. I don't know how they afford it, but I know for a fact people who had been on welfare for a short period of time because they had something that, years ago they had a situation and they weren't working and they needed money. They said to me, it was the worst feeling ever going into that office and picking up a check without earning it. I mean, I think people in general, they want to be of contribution. They want to earn what they get. They need to be in exchange. And with stimmy checks and free money and all UBI, it's just one big out of exchange for me. And I'm more concerned about what it does to a person's soul and spirit, and what that price that they're paying for that check. They probably have no idea, but I would never, ever pay that price ever.
Yeah, that killing the soul is really important to dwell on. There's a movie that just came out recently. It's called The Great Awakening. It was the Plandemic 3 movie from Mickey Willis. And, his first movie talked a little bit about, viruses and things like that. The second one talked about paper trails to Wuhan. And the third one, he really went head on with communism. And he talked about communism versus capitalism. And if you go down that route, what it leads to, how it's kind of infecting the U.S. I mean, Kim, my daughter's at BU now, and she came back recently and she's like, there are actually students that think communism is better there. And I was like, they're actually believing that? She's like, yeah. And if you go down that route, and this movie takes people down that route, it's all dark. And there's always someone out there that say, yeah, but this time socialism is going to be different.
It's going to be different.
Yeah.
It never works. It never works. It's very scary because I see the same signs, Brian. I see it here in the U.S. The way they're leading people to schools, the universities and colleges, and now it's going into high schools. They are not institutions of learning. They're institutions of indoctrination. They're indoctrinating these students to start believing that, socialism and communism is great because everybody's equal. The world isn't equal. It doesn't work that way. And just the other day, we did an event at Arizona State University, and it was Robert, Dennis Prager, and Charlie Kirk of Turning Point. And the subject was health, wealth, and happiness. Very non-controversial. It was just an educational event. It was the professors that stood up and said, we don't want Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager. They're Marxists. They're KKK. They're racist. And they used all this language, and they got the students kind of revved up. And now what the good news is, we did the event. We put a press release out because this was getting so much attention. It was just a simple event, and they've turned it into a political event, which it was not. But as a result, this has now opened the door. Some of the people that were involved have been doing major interviews on major networks. It's become a kind of a test for free speech. And the whole narrative right now, people are using Arizona State and our event as a platform for free speech. And if that was the effect of that event, then I am thrilled, because we're getting knocked out of free speech right, left, and center. You know it on social media. We've experienced it on social media. It's once you have no free speech, you have no community. You have no, what's the word?
Yeah, you have no life.
You have no life. You have no freedom, that's for sure, because it's all propaganda then at that point.
And so you are making some progress with this event. Like, you were able to do it, and it's become a lightning rod, and it's not just getting buried like so many other events did at universities in the last couple of years. So it seems to be making some progress.
Yes. Two of the women that were key people involved from ASU, one was an ASU professor. She was the one that was putting it on, as well as her coworker. They both got fired.
Wow.
And because of bringing Charlie Kirk and Dennis Prager and Robert onto their campus. So she has now been speaking out, and the networks are all picking her up, and a lot of media is picking her up nationwide right now. So it's a really positive thing. I think what we need to do, Brian, is people just have to start standing up. They have to start saying no. And a lot of times that comes from saying no with your wallet, and not well, for me, not patronizing the institutions that are very, very, I'll use the word woke, very, very kind of anti the values that we stand for in capitalism and free markets and free trade, against liberties and freedom. We just have to stand up and say, we're not going down that route.
Yeah. And there's been some great boycotts of some companies out there where people finally have pushed back and say enough is enough. It's nice to see it kind of turning, because from 2020 to 2021, it looked like it was only going one way. Yes. And you made reference. I mean, we were having everything taken off of YouTube, and I was quite literally shocked. I'd spent 9 years putting anything I wanted on YouTube, and all of a sudden, one conversation was deemed violating guidelines, and then the next one, and then the next one. And, when you start taking away people's freedom of speech, everything breaks down.
Yes.
And we all suffer from it. Like we even saw after all the pandemic, if we had actually listened to some of these ideas, we would have saved lives. We would have made progress. And that's always the case. And so it's interesting, Kim, that you bring that up, because ownership of property and ownership of your freedom of speech are linked. They are hand in hand. Yes. And so if people want to start talking about not owning property, about going to where the state owns things, pretty soon your free speech will be gone, and there won't be much you can do about it. Pretty soon then Big Brother comes next, and all of a sudden you're back to some of these very dystopian states that we've seen in the past and we see in the movies. We are already living partial versions of those now. People need to really understand
Isn't communism or Marxism one of the key components, the abolition of private the abolition of private property? And I see that happening. I mean, taxes are going up right now. People aren't being able to necessarily afford when the interest rates go up and their mortgage gets refinanced. They can't afford it. People are leaving their homes. So I see that happening, and it looks very subtle, but I'm not so sure. The banking crisis here is far from over. I think there's a plan in place for the banking crisis, which is not a healthy thing. Small banks are just getting squeezed out right and left. So we gotta keep the fight going.
Yeah, I want to go deep and get your thoughts on what's happening with banking right now. And that concept of private property, we went into the blockchain space, Kim, and there's an incredible guy named Yat Su. He runs a company called Animoca Brands out of Hong Kong. They have about $4 billion in assets. They have a lot of gaming companies and metaverse. And he's a huge proponent, Kim, of digital property rights. Now, a lot of times we don't think about digital property rights. We think about owning our house, owning assets they can't take away from us, by the way, which isn't your dollar necessarily. Now he comes in and he says your digital property rights are just as important. And if you can't own things like your medical data, your browsing history, your identity, your digital property online, then guess what happens? You start to lose your freedoms as well. Yes. And again, I lived that because for YouTube had 2 million of my subscribers, 9,000 of my videos, 9 years of my life, and I didn't own it. They owned it. So guess what? They could take away my right to digital freedom of speech. So this is all tied, and people need to understand.
Yes.
And so now with Web3 and the blockchain, I can actually own these assets forever, and they can be on a blockchain where no company, Web2 company, can take them away from me, which means they can't censor me. So I would say to everybody, all of this is related. And if you talk to the hardcore Bitcoiners, they love it because you can't take away an asset. You can't print more of it and dilute it. And that gives them a freedom, potentially even to speak more, because now their currency isn't being controlled. And
it's interesting because just one other thing is when we look at the assets that we want to own today, we want to own assets that the government can't print, right? The dollar is, where is that? We want tangible things that we can touch, feel, that are real, not fake. Stock market to me is kind of fake. It's all manipulated. The dollar's worthless, going to be worthless pretty soon. There's a lot of interesting things coming up right now.
Well, I want to get your thoughts on those assets. Just before we do, I just want to linger on a point that you mentioned earlier when you talked about UBI. You and Robert have always said that a paycheck is something close to a drug habit. It's as bad as a drug habit. And I had a drug habit for years, and I talked about it publicly in one of my movies. And it's a very dangerous thing that's hard to get out from under. When you tell most people that, they would say, "Oh, that's a bit harsh. This is just the way I get paid." But if a salary is a drug habit, then what is a COVID check? And then what is UBI? You go from a gateway drug to the most dangerous drug on the planet. Fentanyl is like UBI because, if a paycheck, you have to do some work. A COVID stimulus check is every now and then. A UBI is you wake up and you get it.
For nothing. You get it for nothing. Yep.
Yeah, for nothing. So everything about you is ultimately controlled. Yes. You don't own any assets, so you won't have control. And pretty soon, consciously or subconsciously, you are doing whatever the person that wrote you the check tells you to do. And that's why you say it steals your soul.
It's yes. I mean, it's like, who owns the gold makes the rules. And, I teach women about money and investing. One of the things I see is if the husband is the one making the money, and she is not, then she oftentimes gets resentful because she doesn't want to have to ask for money. She doesn't want to ask permission, but it's the same concept. It's that whoever has, and I see money enslave a lot of people, not just women, but when you talk about a paycheck kind of enslaves you to your boss and to that job. I remember the day when we talk about the income statement and the balance sheet. So the income statement, you have your income and your expenses, and the job salary is always in the income column. And then you have your assets and liabilities on your balance sheet. I remember the day when I was always taught to focus on income, get a good paying job, get a raise, work hourly rates and work more hours or raise your hourly rate. It was always about income, income, income. And the lights finally went on after I had been doing a little bit of real estate investing and I had cash flow from my assets. The light finally went on that I was focused on the wrong column. I was focused on acquiring income when I should have been focused on acquiring assets, because those assets give the cash flow into the income column. Instead of me working so hard for money, then the assets work. So I remember that day very clearly, and I went, oh, I think I got this all backwards. And finally, I finally realized it, and it's like, okay, focus just on acquiring assets, and that's what we've been doing ever since.
All right, so let's talk about those assets. And there's a famous quote for you. You said, my family thought I was crazy for focusing on assets rather than a job. And then you say I was crazy successful. So even your own financial education, you had to re-educate yourself to get you into this. But yes, like you said, you had that light bulb moment. And once you did, then you understood what you were doing was right. I guess the cash flow game ensued. Explain to people that don't know what you're talking about what an asset is.
Yes. Okay. Very good. So an asset, according to Rich Dad and Rich Woman, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, whether you work or not. So people say, oh, my house is an asset. Well, no, because if your house, even if it's paid for, you still have taxes, insurance, maintenance, upkeep, all of that. Oh, well, my jewelry is an asset. Well, no, maybe if you sell it, it'll be an asset. You'll get cash for it, but it's not an asset. So the bank actually teach you to call your liabilities assets. So a liability is something that takes money from your pocket. So for example, let's say you buy a little rental. Let's say you buy a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. That was my very first investment. If you're living in it, that's your personal residence, then again, it's going to cost you taxes, insurance, upkeep. It's a liability. It takes money out of your pocket. But if instead I turn it into a rental property and I collect the income and I collect and I pay the debt and I pay the expenses, and at the end of the day, I have a positive cash flow, that's an asset, something that puts money in my pocket, whether I work or not. Same with a stock. So you could have a dividends off of stocks would be an asset. You buy the stock and that pays you a dividend. If you have a business that's generating cash flow, positive cash flow every month, that's an asset. So people are calling their liabilities, and the banks train you to do this. So when you go to the bank and you list all your assets, you're actually listing liabilities. And I think that's one of the biggest problems people have is they are calling their liabilities assets when they're actually not assets. So an asset is something that throws off positive cash flow. If you have that rental house and it's a negative cash flow, then that's a liability. So it's all on how you work the numbers, how smart you are with your money, and looking for things that will generate cash flow. Because as I said before, we work so damn hard for our money. No matter what job you're at, you're working hard to generate that money, but then we're never taught what to do with it. So our whole mission is all about taking control of your financial life. And for us, that was doing it through acquiring assets that generate cash flow.
I love it. And so beware of someone calling, something else. So like you said, the bank is always saying, oh, no, these are assets when they're not. And if you're ever unsure, just look at the damn thing. Look at the last 12 months or 24 months. Did it cash flow or not? And make sure you count up everything, right?
Yep. Yes. Because in the cash flow game, it's funny when you watch people play it for the first time, because one of the doodads that we have is a boat. They got a boat. Oh, I got a boat. That's so great. Well, no, that boat costs you money. It costs you've got to pay for it every month. It costs you fuel. It costs you where you're going to store it. So it's funny to see people's mindset just shift. Robert and I actually did own a sailboat at one point, and we put it into a charter company. So instead of us having to pay for it every month, we got to use it. But the charter company also rented it out on a regular basis. So we turned a liability, a boat, into an asset.
Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. And again, a lot of people say, oh no, my home, it's going to be an asset and I'm going to put the money and get the new kitchen and it's going to reflect it when I sell it. But did it? That's the thing. But did it, or did it in your mind? And so same people do that with their own small businesses and restaurants, where it's just a money pit for 10, 20 years of their life, but they're running a psychological game on themselves. and they're walking around thinking they have assets when what they actually have is liabilities.
Yeah. Or they watch the prices of housing go up as they did in the last few years, with especially in Phoenix, Arizona, through the roof. My net worth is so great. I'm like, net worth is like worth less. There's net worth is meaningless, because until you sell it, then it's really nothing. So I find that interesting.
No, it's another really good point. Now let's talk about assets. Obviously, you started with real estate. You just said you have to be careful because not all assets are created equal. You're aware you have certain assets, stock market, cash, et cetera. Talk about the assets that you like and the ones you don't like and why.
So there's 4 asset classes. There's business, could be your business or a business you invest in. There's real estate. There's paper assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and there's commodities, gold, silver, gas, oil, all of that. So we like to invest in things that are tangible, that are real. It's like there are a lot of fake things out there, and we want to invest in real things. So we primarily invest in rental real estate, because even with all the craziness going on today, people still need a place to live. They still need a roof over their head. And until the government taxes the heck out of it, we're still going to own real estate.
On real estate, like you've diversified your real estate over the years to have not just, those rental properties, but then like hotels and then commercial. And did you grow into that as you got more and more comfortable with the different, sub-asset classes of real estate? Yeah,
that's a great point, Brian, because I started with a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. Then I went to another one and another one. Then we went to a 6-plex, then a 12-plex, and just kept working our way up. And we always say start small, because one of the keys of learning, one of the main keys is we're going to make mistakes. Every time you start something new, and I think that's what holds people back. They're so afraid of making mistakes, but the only way we learn is by making mistakes. So I start small on the little ones. And then as we get more and more, I get more experience, I get more knowledge, I get more confidence. Then we go bigger and bigger. What really set us apart was we had about 60 units at the time, and it was taking all of my time because I was managing the properties, and I couldn't buy any more properties. And then I ran into our dear friend now, Ken McElroy, and he's a property management company. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And he had the exact same values, buy property, cash flow the property, same values as we did. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Now, can you manage my properties? And he said, no. And I'm like, why not? He said, because we only manage properties of 120 units or more. And I'm like, okay. So the next deal we did was 120 units. And that started us on the road of larger apartment buildings. And then, of course, you get more and more confident. One of the biggest mistakes I made in the world of investing, I lost out on an opportunity. It was a fitness club. It was a bigger deal than I was used to. And I let this mind get in my way and tell me why I was going to make mistakes and why I was going to lose money and it's going to be a disaster. I brought in attorneys. It was a mess. Lost that deal. But because of it, and I'd been working on it for so long, another similar deal popped up. And I'm like, oh, I know this. I know the numbers. I know what it's supposed to do. The beauty was the first deal was in Florida. I was living in Phoenix. The second deal was 3 blocks from my house in Phoenix. So sometimes the biggest mistakes, that big mistake turned out to be one of actually today it's our best performing asset.
Wow. And so what's your advice on that, Kim? Because like you said, as things get a little bigger and maybe a slightly different asset class, your tendency is to think, okay, it's going to be different or it's going to be harder or I can't handle it. Like, what is your advice to people as things get bigger? That it's just a little bit bigger? It's just an extra zero on the income statement? Is that all it is?
Pretty much, there's more moving parts. You have to, I think the real key is great property management. You've got to have good property management. So, because I got to the point where I couldn't manage any more properties. And then I found some great teams, and Kenny had a fantastic team. Even this, we're now in a senior housing development that we've just opened. It just opened, but we brought in some of the best managers in the US companies to manage the property. So I don't pretend to have all the answers by any means. I have little answers, but I bring in people that have the experience and they have the knowledge and they know how to make it work. The formula, Brian, is pretty much the same. It's income less expense equals your net operating income. And that's what the banks lend on: your net operating income, your NOI, less your debt equals your cash flow. That's the formula. And just the bigger deals have more numbers, more expenses, more income. But that's the simple formula.
Do you ever ask yourself, Kim, like, why aren't more people doing this if it's so simple?
I do. And I think it's just fear that holds them back. Fear of losing money, fear of making a mistake. I mean, I was afraid the first time I did a deal, I had to come up with $5,000 and I didn't have $5,000. And I think people talk themselves out of it, or they listen to people who have never done a real estate deal, who have never purchased rental properties. I think if there's any shortcut to success, it's to find a great mentor or a great teacher who has done what it is you want to do. I call them real teachers versus fake teachers. They've actually done and have experience in what it is you want to do. I think that's one of the keys. And too often I see people talking to their relatives and husbands or wives or friends, and they just get talked right out of it. But it's really important to surround yourself with people, like-minded people who are doing that. I mean, there's a lot of, online programs, seminars, things like that, where you meet people with similar goals and aspirations, people who have had the experience. I think that's key. I think who you surround yourself with is really, really crucial in terms of having success.
Yeah, amen to that. All right, that's real estate. You have businesses, you and Robert still do. Yeah. Tell me about the other asset classes and just your thoughts on them and, advice to people.
Sure. So business, we have, of course, the Rich Dad Company, and that's pretty much a machine that is operating on a daily basis. We also invest in other people's businesses. But the key for me in that is it's not so much the business as it is the people who are running the business. It's the owners of the business. It's the management team of the business. That to me speaks much louder than the actual business itself in many cases. So just recently, I have a friend of mine. I have invested in his company. He's expanding. They've delivered on everything they said. They underpromised and over-delivered. I love that. So as they're expanding, I'm investing again in their company. We also like companies that we can pick up the phone and talk to the owner. Because that way, we'll get the firsthand scoop on what's happening, what's the income, what's the expenses, what's the problems, what are the setbacks, what are your successes. I want to be able to do that. That's why I don't like the stock market. Personally, I'm not in the stock market because I have no control. I can't pick up the phone and talk to any of these Fortune 500 companies and tell them I don't like how they're running their company. But I want control is one of my key things. I also like gold and silver because, as you mentioned, the US dollar, they're going to start printing probably more and more so they can have this UBI, universal basic income, to give to everybody. So as they keep printing, and there's other factors that are happening as well internationally around the US dollar, but as they keep printing money, the value of that dollar is going to keep dropping, whereby gold historically has held its value. So we use gold as a hedge against the devaluation of the US dollar. Silver we like because silver is used in so many things. It's used in technology. It's used in so many, it's a consumable. And so for that reason, we like silver as well.
Okay. Now those don't cash flow per se, but you like them because you diversify an asset that holds its value better than a dollar.
Correct.
Okay. And Robert gives a great example when he shows that, the silver coins that he bought in the 60s and then where it is today. It's a really good way to show people that this thing that was 25 cents a long time ago, it's now worth like $30 or something. And I think he says, like, he goes to the grocery store and the old ladies kind of get it. They're like, oh, wow, that's crazy. So I think people can see why you would have that. And then that's it. You leave the stocks and the bonds alone. You leave the other commodities alone. You keep it simple.
We keep it real simple. It's really not rocket science at all, Brian. People think, oh, you're so successful, or, you have all this experience and all this knowledge. It really is not rocket science. Anybody can do this. Absolutely anybody can do this. It's real estate is actually, we like it because it doesn't move. It stays where it stays where it is. It doesn't talk back. It's really hard to manipulate it. It is what it is. And people will need a roof over their head. So, and I like real estate. I like creating a nice environment for people to live in and to enjoy and to recommend to their friends. It's an asset that I understand. Now, I have friends that love the stock market because their minds work more technically. So they do very well, especially in options, trading options and puts and calls and all of that. They do very, very well. My mind doesn't work that way. And so I can't sit in front of a computer screen all day watching a thing go up or down, or I want control. I really want control.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting when the whole Silicon Valley Bank was about to go down earlier this year, I watched a big real estate owner who came in and said, look, you know what, at the end of the day, I have a deed and I own that piece of land down the thing. And until the government's about to take it away from me, at least I got that. Now I got some savings account. I might have $1 million in that account, but like, you know, says who? Says somebody in Silicon Valley, and now it doesn't exist. So it was, and even for me during that period, Kim, I was like, I still own London Real, and I've got my people, I've got my media. You know, if the bank goes under, you won't take that away from me.
Correct.
So it was a really, I don't know, like visceral example of how you can own something that's more real than something else. It could be even more real than $1 million in the bank.
Yeah. Oh, I'm nervous about the banks, Brian. I really am. When I saw Silicon Valley Bank, and then there was First Republic, there was like 4 banks that went under. There was a run on the banks. So everybody started taking their money out. Of course, the news didn't report it. The media didn't report it, but people were taking a lot of money out of the bank. What happened is, and I won't go into the whole history, but years ago, they changed the regulations so banks didn't have to hold as much cash. And so what they held bonds, they held treasuries. And they held treasuries at a lower interest rate. So when they raised the interest rate, their treasuries were pretty worthless. They lost a lot of money. So not only was there a run on the banks, but the reserves that the banks had, they had now taken losses on. So that even put them in a worse condition, crippling a lot of banks, especially small banks. I've heard it said that part of the plan is to get rid of the small banks and really concentrate on just the 5 major banks where everybody's going to have a bank account at these 5 major banks or the Federal Reserve in the US.
Yeah, which it's almost the same thing, right? I mean, there's been some like leaked memos and emails that saying, oh yeah, JP Morgan, AKA the Fed, you know, and all these big national commercial banks are now so close to that entity that you might say they're quasi-government entities.
Yeah.
And these local banks, I mean, these local banks to a certain extent are a lot like local businesses and local restaurants. Like they have, like you say, you can call someone up, they can evaluate your company. It's like it's more of a community feel.
Yes.
We're using capital to help a community build, and it's really important. And if
it is. Yeah, it's an essential part of the business. The small banks, they're the ones that know your business. They've worked with you over the years. They've lent you money. They know the problems you've had. They know they're part of your business. And if they go away and now you have this anonymous entity that doesn't know anything about you or your business, they're only going to look at the bottom line. I think it's kind of the backbone of countries, you know, of the UK, of the US. It's the backbone is the small business. And I'm really concerned of what's happening with small business right now, because I still believe small business is the way of the future. It's just getting a little more difficult to operate these days because of all the regulation coming down.
Yeah, it's something to be concerned about. And what the reality is, all these small banks are going under, or they're being taken over by these bigger banks. And whether that was the quote unquote plan or not, it's happening.
It's happening.
And it's happening. And again, during COVID, we saw a lot of small businesses go out of business. We saw a lot of the big, the big players like Amazon make a lot of money. And this is all going one way, and probably not the best way to promote people's financial security, owning your own business, which probably means local freedoms. You're going to get me paranoid here, Kim, the longer I talk.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because I don't want to go down that path. We still, on the positive side, we still have control over our personal financial life. We have control over our personal economy. And so I always look at what can I do? Where can I invest? Where can I grow my business? Because that is still very, very viable. So I would say to people, I actually do not spend a lot of time looking at what, I want to learn about it. I want to be aware. I want to prepare, but I don't watch TV. I don't watch the news. I'm very picky on which news I do listen to, because it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, and I don't want to go there. I want to focus on what I can do, what my team can do, how we can, be the best we can be and grow our business and grow our investments, because that's still probably the best way to take charge of your life.
Yeah, I totally agree. Here's a quote from you. You said, "I can't control the U.S. economy."
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.